This is the podcast overview for Module 13. This is the last module of Week 6 and the last module of the class. We will be covering Chapter 14 in this module, and that's on heart disease, stroke, cancer, and AIDS. So these are some of the heavy hitters that we touched on in the last chapter. Now we'll be diving a little bit deeper into each, the prevalence, the prognosis, and sort of some of the psychosocial factors that surround each of these illnesses that are the big ones for us today. Here is the to-do list for this module, and you'll notice that there are 2 chapters in the longevity project this time around to read, and there's also an extra credit video assignment, and then your last exam. Here are the objectives for the chapter. So you can click here and get an overview of each of these. It's going to start out talking about heart disease and all of that, and then it's going to move into stroke, going to move into cancer, and then it's going to conclude with AIDS. So you get a nice overview of each of these if you listen in on the podcast. Lecture slides for Chapter 14, and this is the extra credit video assignment. It's going to be worth 5 points extra credit. It's going to be due on Friday, and it has to do with HIV and AIDS, so it's a little bit of an older video, but it follows the lives of 6 individuals who are struggling with HIV. It's called Undetectable. Really great video. So if you want to do this for extra credit, it's the last opportunity I'll give for extra credit. You can fill out the worksheet and submit it to the video assignment link after you have watched the video. And then the discussion for Module 13 really has mostly to do with Chapter 14. So you're reading, if we go back up here, you're reading Chapter 14, which is the last kind of heavy content of the longevity project, and then Chapter 15 is like a wrap-up, sort of some final conclusions altogether about individual paths to health and long life. So the discussion has mostly to do with Chapter 14, which is, are you at risk from health-harming chronic stress, which goes great with last module's chapter and this chapter that you're reading. So there's going to be a lot of links that you can talk about between the main text and this longevity chapter. So you're going to go ahead and do the questionnaire again and score yourself and interpret. And then you're going to talk specifically first about the association between war and stress. Lots of research has been done on the effects of war and how the resulting stress from it can affect our bodies. And if you think about the Terman participants, they were part of many wars. Many of them went off to World War II, Vietnam War, even probably not actually, I was going to say the Iraq War and Afghanistan wars. I think they were a little too old by then. But we see the effects of some of the wars that they were in on their lives, the toll that it took. And so what about war and combat specifically has the biggest impact on health? Then we're going to move to looking at explaining the link between depression and heart disease. Include discussion of the disease-prone personality. What does that mean? What does that term signify? How do stress and genes interact? What have we learned about the way that stress affects our actual genes in our body? Some of these questions might take you back to the beginning of class when we talked about stress and we looked at that stress video, Natural Killer. So you might want to mention some of that here. That would be great to tie in some of that material that we talked about earlier, mainly because it goes hand in hand so nicely with this chapter of the longevity project. And then compare this to what you know about the diathesis stress model. So we talked about that a little earlier in the class when we covered stress and how stress affects us genetically and then environmentally. So how does that come into play when we're talking about stress and genes? And then lastly, thinking of your own reaction to and handling of stress versus what the research indicates as beneficial to handling stress. What's the best method for encountering traumatic challenges? So if somebody is going through a traumatic life event, what would the best way be to do that? Like what kinds of things might need to be in place to better ensure that a person was up to the challenge? And then what steps might you take the next time you're undergoing a major life change or stressful event? Now we're talking about major stressors, okay? Not so much like exams or job stress or traffic or roommate troubles, but we're talking about traumatic changes, death of a loved one, maybe a divorce, losing a job, having, a child that runs away. There's so many different things that could be considered traumatic, stressful events and major life events. If you recall, when we talked about stress, we talked about some of the different major life stressors that occur over one's, life course. So talk about some of that and sort of set up a kind of a mock treatment plan for what you would want to consider, the next time you're in a stressful life event, because most of you will face one. If you haven't already in your life course, you will face probably more than one stressful life event. So it's really good to now sit back with all the knowledge you've learned and think about how you might brace yourself for that. What kinds of things should you be doing in your life to ensure that that goes smoothly? What kinds of personality traits might help you to better ride out those kinds of storms? All right, and so then once you've covered the discussion, then you'll be ready for your last exam, exam 4. It's going to be due Friday, and it's covering chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14, same format. It's not cumulative, it's just 50 questions, 50 minutes, covering those 4 chapters. And the best way, again, to study for that is going back and making sure that you know all the answers to these questions. These are objectives, but really you can pose them as questions to yourself to study for the test. So you want to go back to chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14 and take a look through and make sure that you understand all of the major concepts and objectives. And that will wrap up our last module and our last week. It's been a great class. I've been able to get to know a few of you online via office hours and chatting, and I always love that. Not every online student wants to do that. Some like to just kind of keep a distance and learn, and that's fine. But I always find it special when I get to connect with a few of you, via Zoom or even just back and forth via email. So I've really appreciated the opportunity to do that with some of you this summer, and I wish you all the best with the upcoming fall semester. Thanks, everyone.